very little city-states that were ruled by independent lineages. And many of the books deal with this theme of the record of who was who and who was ruling what. So there were instruments used in negotiation for marriage, for succession, etc. Where the books would explain exactly what the very complex structure of the genealogical relationships between these kingdoms, these city-states, was. Now this is another example. The center of the valleys of Oaxaca. And here it's a little bit easier to see what this meant, because the Mixtec ones go in these lines, a little bit more difficult. This one's pretty clear. They go from the bottom up, and they just list the ruling couples, one through time. So this is the beginning one, this is their son who married this lady, and then the son married this lady, the easy thing, the easy thing we can recognize at this level is that these generations are represented by a man and a woman facing each other. In each of these cases, these are the men, and these are their spouses. The interesting thing is that normally, and especially in the Zapotec area, the lineage goes through the male line. The Mixtecs are a little bit more complex. Women also inherit titles. And basically that, at the end, there was a big problem when Mixtecs and Zapotecs started to marry, because then, what was the system? And it was precisely the enormous conflict that broke out just before the conquest in the valleys of Mexico and the valleys of Oaxaca. But in this case, it's interesting to note that while the men are local, the women marry in from the outside, and under each woman is a short text in Zapotec that states where she comes from. What is her hometown? Because that was important to know. Because each time that a new woman would come into the genealogy, that in fact meant a new political alliance with the family of that area.
Sorry.
Important thing in these documents is also often the representation of the Spanish conquest, like we see here. So this is this ongoing line of rulers, and then suddenly you have a Spaniard walking in, you have a problem in the inheritance, and you have colonial rule. Next one. Some become.
Pero dile, ¿no? Pero hay que avisar. We don't want them to think that we're alone in the church doing weird things, like stealing some of their...
This is another example. This is an extremely complex one. This is on the Mixteca. What we see here is not only a register of these couples, ruling couples. It's a kind of map. It's a very complex map of a large area towards the coast. This is north. This is the current border with the state of Guerrero. This is the coastal area over here. This is the Mixteca Alta, and this is the area where the Alta turns into the coastal area. This is the town of Santa Maria Zacatepec. And this document explains how in the Mixteca Alta, let's say the core region of the Mixtecs, a young male was sent out by a very important king, who was precisely the successor of King Jaguar, who sent off a young nobleman on a road, a long migration. We assure he didn't move by himself. Probably it's really like a population movement of hundreds, maybe thousands of people. On the road, you can just follow the road going through the document. And it leads you through the storyline. The storyline is the road. And it ends up here. So it is a story which is drawn on a map. And it explains how the Mixtecs got to Zacatepec. Today it's still Mixtec. Many people speak Mixtec. It has one of the most beautiful the textile traditions of Oaxaca. And what's interesting is not only the women who wear textiles, traditional textiles, which is normally the case in the villages, but in this case it's also the men, and the men's costume is really spectacular. So here we have a combination of a map with a history line, which you can read through the map. The next one. This is when you put this history on a modern map. So it's the same thing, but this is the migration of these Mixtec people moving. This is the square. I think you go one back. One back.
Oh, one back, sorry.
So there's a square here with boundary signs on it. Big square going all over the document, all big chunk of documents contained in this square. And all these hieroglyphs on the square are boundary markers. This square coincides with this area more or less. So it's, of course, the square is an idealization. The intent was not to reproduce the natural reproduction of the landscape. It was to idealize the landscape. It was to make it regular. So this basically is just a modern version of the scene again. And then the blue line represents this story that involves going out of the Nexicho Alta into the Baja with dates, persons, different generations, etc. What they went into is this area of the this is a drainage area, a large drainage area, very old, very good for the production of cotton. And that's probably the reasons why the Mixtecs moved into the coast. They were producing cloth, but they did not have access to the primary materials. And somewhere during the 12th century, they just went and got them. Next one. This is Zacatepec today. This is the drainage area that you can see on the map, and it's reproduced in the end zone, the pictographic document. That's the church for some reason. This is another example, simpler. It is a series of boundary markers, and inside the boundary markers is a lineage. You've already seen this idea. Men and women facing each other. Here they sit seated on a straw mat. And that is rather meaningful because a man and a woman do not sit on the same mat. It's like sitting on the same bed. It means they're married. So what is interesting of this is the minimal land territory combined with genealogy. Again, the conquest is marked. You can see it here. They have pre-Hispanic names, and then suddenly they have Doña Maria and Don Tomás, Don Luis, Doña Marta. And suddenly, boom, change to Spanish names. So the conquest happens here. You can see it by the names. Just to give you an example, if the conquest is here, and these are pre-Hispanic rulers, and this ruler comes from an earlier site, and is the son of this guy, and these are the ancestors, and this is the founder of the lineage. And we have an average of about 22 years for each generation, for the ruling span of each generation. So from when the father dies until you die, let's say. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22 generations before the conquest. 22 generations, each generation 22 years. We are back in the 11th century. So even if this document was painted 2 generations after the conquest, it is the record of the ruling line of a small village in Nexicho Alta going back until the 11th century. That's rare even for Europe. It's not common for this kind of records. That's also, Mesoamerica is really an exceptional situation in writing on a world level. Painting in this style, this is typical Mixteca style, lasted until the end of the 16th century when it was completely replaced by alphabetic writing. Of course, not alphabetic writing in Spanish, because no one spoke Spanish at the time in Oaxaca. The alphabetic writing first in Nahuatl, the Aztec language, and then later replaced by alphabetic writing in Mixtec, or in Zapotec, or in Chocho. These are the 3 local languages that were extensively written during the colonial period. And it was only until the independence of Mexico that writing in the indigenous language was abolished. So, to state it a little bit directly, the current problem of analphabetism is the creation of a national state. It's not the result of colonialism. It's the national state that abolishes the native written traditions of 2,005 years old. But then, in the late 17th and early 18th century, there's this curious revival of this kind of imitation of an ancient style of painting. And sometimes it's been assumed that these are falsifications, but clearly not. Then some cases of falsification occur. But these documents don't even attempt to be original documents. They are new creations. They turn out to be the attempts of Stephanie can correct me if I'm wrong because she's a specialist in this area. But I personally believe, based on recent research, that they more or less belong to the desire to create new indigenous documents, not necessarily falsifying ancient ones, creating new ones, and then using the traditional formats, using traditional materials, using indigenous language. So we get what is known as the Nexicho documents. There are about 50 of these documents known. They're from the area around Mexico City. This is more or less the area from which these 50 documents are. And they look like this. They use traditional materials. They go back to the kind of picture writing. They have glosses in Nahuatl, the indigenous language of the area. But it's very obvious that these are not meant to be cities of the documents. It's a revival of this written style. And very interesting, it's precisely in the same period that this document was produced, 1691, Nexicho Ixtepeji. And Nexicho Ixtepeji, document that was discovered in Milwaukee, seems to be a Oaxacan Techaoyan thing. It seems to be an influence from central Mexico, the idea to go back to these old materials and forms and produce new documents that somehow strengthen these indigenous identities and indigenous claims of a new awareness of an indigenous presence in Spain. Now this gives you an idea of the development of writing systems in Mesoamerica. So in the Olmec times, we had imagery. We don't write. Very few people believe in this Olmec writing. But I was pretty sure that there are first hieroglyphs in Zapotec about 500 BC. And traditionally, monument 3 in San Jose Morocco is traditionally seen as the eldest one. That's just symbolic, but 500 BC, pretty sure that the first calendrical hieroglyphs. Maya writing starts 300 BC, early life. We don't know if there's older stuff, there may be older stuff. These first examples that were found recently, very recently, was just pushed back several hundred years, the original Maya writing. It may be that they're the same time. They have different origins, although they're both Mesoamerican systems. They both use 260-day cycles, but they're different origins. Basically, Maya writing just goes on until really the end of the 18th century, I would say. Around 1700, the last documents apparently written are in the center of the tent. The last Maya city falls into Spanish. So these are the areas of Mesoamerica. This is the timeline. And these are the writing traditions that develop over time in different areas. So it starts on the Guatemala islands and coast and moves into the Yucatan North. That's why I showed you the image at the time of the conquest. Maya writing in the northern part of Yucatan. Zapotec and Linya are basically covering here the existence of the city of Montalban. After that, there's the traditional Central Islands epi-classic styles, not well understood. It's a moment in which the old system of the Zapotec of Montalban is changed into what's going to be the big system in central Mesoamerica, which is the Mixteca Puebla style, which is the part that I marked around Oaxaca in central Mexico. From the Aztec Tenochtitlan area into the Mixtec area, which is was, let's say, the high point of this writing. A very little known third tradition is marked over here, which is the Zogaean or Isthmian style of writing, which is different. Very few text known. It's undeciphered. So if you want to do something after your retirement, then that's a good challenge to do. Next.
Next.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're not going to give you this. The cigarette. It's in fact yes.
Yeah, we don't even smoke. But
no.
Okay.
Oh
no, I think yeah, okay, good. So, now I'll talk a bit, and I'll try to do it quickly because I'm sure you're hungry, right? And I am between you and your food. So. Okay, so this is the document that we have, which is in Milwaukee, which we call the Tira de Ixtepeji or the Ixtepeji Scroll. As you can see, and I hopefully, after what Bas has told us, you can see there's this lineage, right? This genealogy. He already told you this is a genealogy. We have a horse here, which probably means the conquest, right? And then we have what seems to be a map here. This part goes here, right? But if I had to put it in one image, it would be very small. Okay? So I'm going to explain to you a bit of these different parts. But we also see that there are written text, alphabetic text, the long one here. 3 of them are in Spanish. The earliest one, 1691, 1709, and then 1718. Okay? And in these texts, they refer to judicial claims. So what this means that this document was used in judicial claims. Okay? So they are presented before a judge with certain claims. And when we look at these texts, we actually found the earliest one, 1691. We actually find the document that relates to this early claim from 1691. This is highly unusual. I know very few cases where we actually have a pictorial and the documents that go with it. Okay, but in this case.